So today, I think it's our great honor to have Professor Zhou Shuhua with us, and then for our class, and then he's going to share very interesting how to teach the young, emerging scholars like you to thinking about how to transform yourself from perhaps media professional to now you can become a very like him, well established in future, the media scholar. So let me just give a very brief introduction to him. So Shuhua is the endowment chair journalism studies, and he has a good title called Leonard Golden Thumb Endowed Chair in Radio and Television. That's because he used to be the 100 best TV host, for the broadcasting news in English in southern China. And then he kept on doing the line of research relating to broadcasting news, videos. And so he's going to share some topic about the very beginning, the sensationalism in TV news. And now the affordances actually emerging in newspaper, maybe in future will shed light to the digital news. All right. And then his primary research television news and the human recognition of mediated messages using news as the very important stimuli. Okay. And so we will look at the research and understand the MIS method. I would say the first one will be more like content analysis and also have qualitative research. I knew that he did something about experiments because he has so prolific, other publications and also have survey papers, so much. And today we only have 2 hours. So without further ado, and let's just welcome Professor Zhou to give us a very excellent talk for today. Thank you. Let's give him a big.
Hey, I can tell all of you that I didn't pay Trisha at all for that great promotional introduction. Thank you so much. No, no, I'm not as accomplished as she present me to be, really. And I may not talk about some of the study that like affordances. So depending on time, I'll talk about some other research. I rethink about the presentation today, and so let me share my PowerPoint with you first. You can see my PowerPoint here, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Good. So since this is a talk on your graduate study and how to find a path, something like that. So I am going to share with you just a little bit about my personal path. I see a lot of interesting faces on the screen, so I'm quite excited to share with you what I have been doing and how you can find your own way in academia or in research or in your future profession, I guess. So just a little bit about myself. I didn't want to, elaborate too much on it, but this will give you some kind of background how I carve a path for my own, and what kind of background do I have and why I do the kind of research that I do there. You'll be surprised to hear that my first degree is a Bachelor of Science in tropical crops. Okay, it's in agriculture, and it was done in a college in Hainan Island. One of the big islands of mainland China. And then I did another degree in English language and literature from Jinan University. After that, I actually taught 3 years back at the first college that I get my Bachelor of Science, South China College of Tropical Crops. So I taught three and a half years before moving to GDTV, that is Guangdong Television. For some of you who know, it's in Guangzhou, just 2 hours from Hong Kong. And I was actually the first one to do English news in a Chinese, well, not the first one. In my station, it was the first one. They recruited me out of my college, and I was anchor, editor, producer, and so on for about 6 years. So I stay in this TV station in the news department doing English news for 6 years, and then I say, maybe it's time to further my understanding of journalism, because as you can see, my background is not in news, it's not in journalism, is in tropical crops, is in English language and literature, and then I got into news, and I did not have the quite a training of news, of journalism, and quite the understanding of journalism. So I decided to go to pursue a graduate degree. Also at the time, I was the director of English News, and I was leading a group of staff member who all have master's degrees, just like you. As you can see, I have 2 bachelor's degrees at the time, and then I was leading a team of editors and producers, all with master's degree, and some of them in journalism. So I decided to pursue further graduate studies, and went to IU, Indiana University, in Bloomington, Indiana. Those of you who know the geography of the United States know that Bloomington is about an hour from Indianapolis, where the Indy 500, the race car race, is, and about 3 hours from Chicago. And after I got my master's from Indiana University, I decided to continue my PhD, the doctoral degree, and I was actually recruited by at the time by Missouri also, and some other universities, but I decided to stay at IU and follow my advisor. And after graduation, went to University of Alabama. Those of you who are interested in American football know that that is a football university. They have won quite a few national championships. And I stayed in Alabama for 19 years. Actually, during the 7th year in 2007, that's when I get to know your professor, Professor Trisha Lin, at Nanyang Technological University in Singapore. I was spending my sabbatical there and had the pleasure of meeting Trisha and becoming very good friends with Trisha until this day. So, and 4 years ago, about 4 years ago, I decided to move on from Alabama and move to Missouri, University of Missouri, at the School of Journalism. So that is my background, and as you can see, my research is related to my background there. So just so you know. And talking about being a graduate student, I can tell you that after working for a few years in the industry and going back to school, some of you may have the same experience. After you work a few years in the industry and going back to school, it's a very tough situation because in a university versus in the industry, it's quite a big differences there, right? So I was in the news, for example, and every day you go out to cover stories and you see what is going on. You meet dignitaries, you meet world leaders, and you report on the news. Everything happens so fast, and you are at the forefront of what is happening around you, around the world. But when you go back to school, it's so quiet. Everything is so quiet. And I coming from Guangzhou with at that time I think it's already 10 million people, right? And going to Bloomington, a college town of 40,000 people, and there's just a huge big difference there. And so it took me at least 2 or 3 months to get used to the slower pace. And then you gradually begin to appreciate the quietness, the non-disturbance. There is no interference, whatever. You focus on what you are trying to do. And I want to begin by talking about being a graduate student, because I think it's really important that you realize there is a big difference between being an undergrad student and being a graduate student. Being a graduate student, you really have, first of all, adjust your mindset about your role in your education. So, as an undergrad, people will say, okay, I expect my teacher to feed me information, to tell me what to do, to assign me homework, and fulfill the requirement of a course there. But as a graduate student, my first advice is that you have to adjust your mindset, meaning that you need to take things in your hands. Don't just take a course because it will fulfill a requirement. I understand that. Yes, do that. But when you are taking a course, you need to say, okay, this is what the course is about, and this is what the professor is telling us what to do. But is there another way to approach this? What am I going to do so that I can get the most out of this? That is the kind of mindset I think a successful graduate student should have. To the point where my doctoral advisor, Professor Annie Lang, I think she said it best. She is talking about doing a PhD, right? And she is saying that, when you do a PhD, you are actually getting a license to teach yourself. That goes to what I was trying to say as a graduate student. It's not just coming to classes and fulfilling your requirements. It is to say, how can I find my own way of learning? So I know that with the masters, you can claim that you can teach yourself, because with the PhD, that's a terminal degree, and nobody else. Well, you have a postdoc, but that is typically related to a job, right? And so the mindset for graduate student really is take matters in your own hands, okay? And then realize that reading is not optional, that is very easy to understand. Sometimes we say, okay, the professor asked us to read 4 articles, 4 papers, and 2 books. I have to do it. That is for sure, right? But not only that, reading is a must. Whether you read from a book, whether you read from the internet, it doesn't matter. You have to learn, and that's the other mindset there. Okay, and commit to active reading and critical thinking. So, so when we say active reading versus passive reading that imply that uh, there is a big difference between active reading and active and passive reading. Just like I think all of you understand English, right? In English, you have an active vocabulary and you have a passive vocabulary, whether you realize it or not. Your active vocabulary are the words that you can use, right? You can easily use those words in your writings, in your articulation, in making arguments or whatever. But there are some words that you don't have. They are not in your active vocabulary. They are in your passive vocabulary because you can only recognize them. You can only say, "Oh, I understand what that means," but you cannot use it. The same is true when you are reading actively. You are really taking in the information versus that information just go through your head there. Okay, so active reading just means that you have to read something critically. Don't just take the words for granted. Don't just take the arguments being presented. You have to ask, why are they making these arguments? Why they are not making some other arguments? Are these arguments solid? Are they fishy? You have to think about it. The other one is be proactive in solving problems. When you are going through a graduate program, just like you're going through a master's program, I'm pretty sure in your 2 years, in your year and a half or 3 years, you will encounter a lot of problems. Don't just depend on other people to solve your problems. Be proactive. Think about, beforehand what kind of problem there might be. And when you have a problem, think about what are some of the possible ways to solve them. And That's part of active learning too. And I think the next one, be diligent in how you manage your time, is truly important. It's easier said than done, right? For example, I myself is a procrastinator. You know why? Because I used to work in television. And in television, when you say 6 o'clock, the news is on, it has to be on. I'm Cantonese, and so when we say the news is on, we say "chut gai," right? It's going out to the street, and you say, well, okay, you have to do it. So from my professional life, I have learned that I can do it. When there is a deadline, I will beat it. However, that is a bad habit to have in academia. In university settings, it really is a bad idea. But to this day, sometimes I still, think about, oh, when I have a deadline, I can get it done. In 3 days, in 7 days, I can get a paper or whatever. That is bad, and I'm still trying to get rid of it. But managing your time is truly important. I have often said to my graduate students, masters or PhD, it really does not take a genius to go to graduate school or to finish a PhD. It actually takes somebody who work diligently, who work hard to get that degree. Most of PhDs, trust me, most PhDs are not geniuses, okay? They are the same as you are. And you have the same talent, you have the same ability. It's just that they are more disciplined. They are more hardworking than most people, and they manage their time well. Okay, and so if you are taking 3 courses and you say, okay, how do I manage? How do I allocate how much time to do this course, and how do I set aside time so that I can have my own, paper written, and so on. So managing your time is a skill that I think everybody in graduate school can really learn on their own. Okay. And of course, when you are a master's student, when you are a PhD student, quality writing is really important. So I pick and choose some of these, just throw out some advice, and I think it's important. You can have ambitions, you can have goals or whatever, but knowing how to be a good graduate student is a very good start for your career. These habits will carry on throughout your career, and they will make or break your success there. So, Professor Lin asked me to talk about to talk to you about how to come up with a research topic. What kind of research should you do? And I know that all of you are in the convergence, new media convergence cohort. And I will try to tie it into that. But the examples that I'm going to give, I hope that you can take it holistically and say, oh, okay, this is the way he approaches things, and I may be able to learn something from it. So regarding what to study, it sounds like that you are already in a program that will, direct you to do certain research or to learn certain things there, which is totally fine because each area is huge, is big. But I want to talk to you about the perspectives and how to look at these kind of studies, area of study, and ways to study it. My first advice is you need to find your love, not only in life, okay, but also in research. Really, because when you love doing something, you can accomplish a lot more than people who don't love their job. Unfortunately, I know that in this world, most people actually, majority of people don't like what they do. That really is a problem. Okay, if we can find things that people love to do, they will do it beautifully. They will do it a lot better than most people. And most people who are very productive in academia, who are who are good at what they are doing, they love what they do, whether it's making a pancake or cooking a dish or making a rocket. Whatever they do, that you must love what you do. If you don't, it's going to be a torture, right? It's going to be hard. You don't have the motivation. If you love what you are trying to do, you don't even need to motivate yourself. You will go to do that something there. So my first advice is find your love. And if you are in an area, you got into a program and you say, not exactly what I try to do, but there is no way out. Let's say, unfortunately, you are too deep into it. I will still say find something within this area that you truly enjoy, and it will benefit you a great deal. It will make life a lot easier for you. Okay. The other one is when you approach a certain area, and I'm going to talk about a couple of examples, throughout the talk. You need to think comprehensively. What that means is you need to be able to step back and see where this problem is and how should you approach it. Are you going to approach it from the left, from the right, from behind, from the front? Are you going to approach it from a theoretical perspective, from an applicable perspective? Are you going to approach it through via the user's perspective or the producer's perspective? So you need to be able to just step back a little bit and think about what that particular question, problem is, what that issue is. and approach it. And again, I'm going to use a couple of examples there. And oftentimes when we try to do research, we are so excited about it. We jump right into it. I would say, hold on, think about this particular problem and find out what has been done about this particular problem. What is out there? You need to be able to stand on the shoulder, so to speak, of these people, right? If not giants. You need to know what has been researched, what has been known before you make an informed decision. So make sure you know the literature. Fortunately, these days, it's a lot easier for us to find relevant literature. We have Google Scholar, we have, all these database, we have huge libraries. You can easily find out what is being studied, what is being offered there. And these days, we know that there are a lot of interdisciplinary approach. And fortunately, these kind of information from other disciplines. Let's say that you are interested in social control. One of the topic that I want to mention a little bit later in news analysis is social control. And you say, hey, I need to go to sociology and try to study why we need control, what is, I mean, why a society has to have control in order to function well, and to what degree is control necessary, and so on and so forth. So you have to go to the relevant literature, or sometimes by saying knowing the literature, we mean that, in each discipline, we approach something very differently. So take the topic that of redundancy in television news. So in television news, for example, we often talk about the audio track versus the video track, right? Visual and audio. Do they complement each other? Do they have the same information? And that is what redundancy means in our discipline, in the communication discipline. But if you go to education, let's say, education people, they will say, okay, when we teach a word, when we teach the word love, how do we teach it, in audioly? How do we teach it in writing or whatever? That is the kind of redundancy they are talking about. And so it's very different, but they are almost the same concept. And so knowing the literature also means that, when there is a different perspective from another discipline, you really want to know that body of literature as well, so that you say, can I borrow something from that discipline? Can I, utilize this perspective in studying what I'm trying to study? Um, and and so when we think about new media and convergence, just like you're all studying here, I want you to think about these particular big picture kind of things, right? So first of all, anytime you do research or anytime you approach an issue, you want to understand at what level of analysis are you going to operate. What does that mean? So it means that, when you are looking at a new technology, are you thinking about the new technology having an effect on society as a whole? If you are asking that kind of question, you are really looking at it from a sociological perspective, right? Because you are looking at society as a whole. Or a little bit smaller, you say, hey, how does smartphone changes our culture? That is a huge question. That is a big level analysis there. Versus if you say, how does technology changes the way our university operate. Now that is changing an organization that is smaller, right? And so level of analysis is really the first thing we need to think about. And of course, you can go down to the group level, you know. Um, I can throw an example. How does new smartphone, for example, change the way gangsters doing crime, let's say, and so that is affecting a group activity versus individual. If you say how does technology changes the way we consume news, that is at the individual level, and I will talk more about at the individual level what kind of things you can do. But really, I mean, level of analysis is really important in trying to think about, social implications, cultural implications, organizational implications, and so on and so forth. Okay. The other thing about new media and convergence is what exactly are you interested? It's a big area, right? It sounds like that new media, that's pretty focused, that's pretty specific. But there are so many new media and convergence. There are so many ways of convergence and so many things to study about convergence. So think about, I mean, your time is limited, your resources is limited. So think about, are you going to focus on technology? Are you going to look at the attributes of these technology and how does technology, change the way that message are being sent, for example? Or are you interested in the users? Are people getting addicted to smartphone? Are people getting consumer activism going on in online format when people are trying to cheer for a charity? How do they do that? For example, in an online platform, those are questions about users. And if you are like me, you are interested in the medium. So in terms of medium, we have, the newspaper medium, we have radio medium, we have television medium, we have these internet as a medium, for example. And you can make an argument that each medium has its own characteristics. Each medium is different, right? So I often ask my students when they think about TV news versus print news, newspaper news, right? And you say, so what are some of the stories that appeal to television more than to print? And conversely, what are some of the stories that appeal to print versus television? It sounds very abstract. Let me give you an example. Okay, whenever we are talking about abstract, whenever we talk about abstract ideas like freedom, liberty, and even inflation, right? Talk about money getting inflated or deflated, anxiety, all these are abstract concepts. And when you think about it, in the television medium, it's really, really hard to produce stories on abstract concepts. Really, really hard because television is very specific. It has to have visuals. You have to be able to visualize it. So, how do you visualize freedom? How do you visualize liberty? How do you visualize inflation? It's really hard, and you have to translate it into specific things, right? So we make an argument that the print medium is perfect for these kind of abstract ideas versus television. is really perfect for specific events rather than issues. It's perfect for emotional outpouring. When you are talking about the Olympics, for example, people winning and losing, and you have emotional athletes, spectators, that is good television, because television is very easy to portray these emotions, but it's very hard to talk about abstract concepts. And so you have a lot of talking heads, just talk about these ideas there and so on. But anyway, I mean, when you are looking at new media, when you are looking at the new iPhone, the new streaming device, you can think about that medium, that particular medium. What are some of the attributes that you want to study? Right? Or you're interested in how new media changes the way that content is being produced. These days, lots of people can hold up a smartphone, a camera, and then shoot video, for example, versus in the old days. Um, when we work in the industry, it's the professional camera person that takes these videos. It's the lightman, it's the soundman that or person that do these. So if you are into production, you can try to see whether new technology has changed the way that production is being done, or dissemination for that matter, right? And so after you identify, the area of study, the level of analysis, then you can decide whether a particular method is a good method. And so you can say, okay, I'm going to do a content analysis, or I'm going to use a survey, I'm going to use an experiment, and so on, and case study, and so on. And also, when you are thinking about these, you have to think about what is your ultimate goal when you're doing these kind of research, or pursue a new knowledge there. Is it just for curiosity? If you are just curious about something and you want to find out, that is very, I mean, the way to approach it is very different, right? You can just pursue your curiosity. Is it for publication? Is it for graduation? Those are different ways to look at things there. And speaking of new technologies impact, we can spend all day long to talk about how new technology has introduced new paradigms and new thinkings, and so on and so forth. But in general, when you think about newer technology, especially related to media, you can think about that the old days of mass media is no longer the case there. Media is now much more individualized, right? So when we go to YouTube, you know that the YouTube you are looking at your own computer is different from the YouTube page that I'm looking at, because algorithm has changed the way that that we consume media. In the old days, we say people always turn to the evening news, CBS, NBC, ABC News, for example, and watch what is going on, and to learn what is happening in the country, in your own region. But now it's no longer the case, and mass is becoming very individualized in time and space because of new technology. Just think about what we are doing now, what we are doing today. I'm sitting here in my hotel room in Hong Kong, and you are in Taiwan, or in some other places, Malaysia, different maybe European countries. And we are no longer being limited, and that is because of new technology here. So time and space are further compressed, and so it does not allow any delay anymore, right? That's why newspapers are dying, because the newspapers are too late. By the time you read the news in the newspaper, it's already 24 hours. It's no longer valid because of these time and space being compressed there. And interactivity, in newer media, we all can go to a website and see social media and see how people respond to a posting that you did, how people respond to a new program, and so on. And so producers and consumers, they can talk to each other. So interactivity allows two-way communication versus in the past. When a newspaper is printed, it's out, it's for people to consume. And whatever they think, that's what they think. There is no other way around. But these days, you can see, in fact, a lot of people are more interested in the comment section in a news story than the story itself, right? So newer technology also makes media centric to human centric. What that means is, in the past, we are always thinking about, oh, television production, newspaper circulations, and so on. So it's all revolve around media. But now we are trying to say it doesn't matter what medium you are going to send out a message. Is the message appealing to the user? Is the message appealing to the humans? And so on. So it's human centric versus media centric in a lot of ways. So a moment ago, I said whenever you want to study something, you have to study it very comprehensively. That is being done so that it serves at least two purposes. One, letting you know where you stand when you are doing your research, right? Exactly where you are. What are you trying to solve in this big picture thing? Where are you in this big picture? The other one is to make you more productive. Why is that the case? Because what you can do in one study, you are going to say, okay, I have accomplished this study, I have done this study. But related to study, what are some of the things that I can research? What are some of the area that I can go to so that I gain a more comprehensive picture of this particular phenomenon, right? And so when you are thinking comprehensively, it allows you to have the broad perspective, but it also allows you more and more research and more projects and more papers and more production. Okay, and so that's how you make your career there. So let's say, I'm a media effects person. So in terms of media effect, we always ask at least three questions, three big questions. So media effects on what, right? On what? So it goes back to our question about level of analysis. Are you talking about media having an effect on society? Are you talking media effect on culture? Are you talking about on the individual? And the other one is caused by what? So you say that media have an effect on people, but why? What causes it? So you have to ask that question, and then the so what question. So okay, these kind of content make you pay attention. So what? What does that mean? Does that when you are paying attention, does that mean you learn more? Does that you memorize? Does that mean you memorize more? Does that mean it affects your emotion? And so on. So these are the bigger questions whenever we think about media effect research. So on the effects on what question I already said, you know, you need to think about, okay, are you conceptualizing effect from a big perspective versus an individual perspective? Even on the individual, let's say, and you say, okay, media have an effect on these users. You need to ask yourself, are you talking about behavioral effects because you know a boy or elementary school girl gets a smartphone? How does that change their behavior? Do they not talk to other people anymore? Do they just look up their phone and bury their head in the phone? That is behavior, right? Or you say because of smartphone addiction, okay, they are addicted to the smartphone, they don't get out of it. Does that affect their attention span? You know, people say these days because you have one video coming at you and then you have another video coming at you, and people no longer can stay long enough to a 2 hour lecture, for example. Our attention span is getting shorter and shorter because media comes at us at multiple angles at all the time. And so, in terms of cognitive effect, is our attention span getting shorter and shorter? Are we learning something? That is a cognitive effect. Or are we not learning something? Because, you know, when you're reading it from a computer screen versus when you're reading something from a book, are we learning the same thing? That is a very good question. And that is a cognitive effect question, right? Or you can look at, you know, media having an effect on people's attitude. You know, when you see so much war coverage, the Russians and Ukrainians are engaging in a war. The Russian invaded Ukraine, and so, you know, when you see so much carnage, so much destruction, how does that change your attitude towards Vladimir Putin? And how does that change your attitude towards Russia, Russian people, Russian culture? Uh, and you can also think about affective effects emotionally, meaning how does that affect you emotionally when we are seeing a murder, when we are seeing a missing child in the news? How does that affect our emotion? Or when we are watching a game, you know, a basketball game, a soccer game, a football game, what is the emotional experience like? That is an emotional effect. So even when we are talking about effects on what at the individual level, you have to identify what are the effects you are interested in. What are you going to focus on, rather than just say effects on the individual? That is not thinking comprehensively. And so by thinking comprehensively, I really mean that you have to exhaust some of the variables here and just say, okay, I am going to focus on this, right? So in the past, you may know that when we are talking about media effects, there, you know, very early on, people hypothesize that media have a hypodermic needle effect, or you know, you know, whenever media sends out a message, it affects everybody immediately, right? And then they say, no, you know, when you look at, you know, how people behave, actually, media has a very limited effect, and that is because the limited effects people are only looking at change behaviors, and we know that behaviors are hard to change. So when you are expecting to find something being changed in terms of behavior, you don't find it, and people conclude that there is limited effect. And then people come back and revisit that model and say, no, 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 hold on, hold on. There are effects. It's just that effects are not readily available, are not readily perceived. For example, when you learn something, when your attitude is being strengthened, you don't see that, right? But media do have an effect, and that's why in later on we have the moderate effect model, and so on. So it has to be, you have to think comprehensively about that. And talking about comprehensively, let me give a quick and interesting example. So in terms of individual effects, one of the effects that we often study is after exposure to media information, new media or not, okay? After people consume information or exposed to information, how does that change their perception? So that is one simple cognitive effect that we are talking about. So in terms of cognitive effect, we can say you can study attention, you can study memory, you can study emotion, you can study motivation, you can study personalities, and so on and so forth, right? I am going to single out one particular area of cognitive effect, which is perception, and trying to illustrate how we may approach just a perceptual effect there. So, so when we think about perception, people say, why do we want to study perception? Well, it's because the way you look at things, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. A lot of things depends on how we perceive it. When we think that this is good, then a lot of the other attitudes and other perceptions will come in based on that premise that this is good. So, but when you hate something, the when you change when you are fixated on the hatred there, uh, the way you look at that thing, that object, it's will get affected by that hatred there. So if you change that, if you say, "Oh, I don't hate it anymore," if you change the way that you look at that, the things you look at will change, and that's why it's interesting to study perception, right? So, so we say, what is perception then? And we say perception is a process individual try to organize the sensory data, right? When you see something, when you hear something, those are our sensory data. And when it comes to our head, we will try to interpret that, just like a cat looking at the mirror. And if the cat, a person or the individual's behavior, we make an argument is really based on their perception of what reality is, not on reality itself. So in reality, this is an animal, and this animal is a cat, right? But if the cat thinks big of himself, if the cat is full of himself, right? He looks at the mirror, he sees a lion. Okay, I'm a lot more capable than other cats, for example, and that is what that is. So the world as is perceived really is the world that is behaviorally important. What that means is our perception change the way that we look at things. Uh, it, it, I mean, there are a lot of sayings in all cultures, right? So when we think somebody is really beautiful, that somebody is really beautiful. Okay, when you are a lover and you are in love with somebody, and the person actually is not that pretty, but you think that person is the most beautiful person in the world, and that's what perception really is about. But I caution about thinking comprehensively. And I think that is one way to really approach all media research. So think about perception itself. Time after time, there are a lot of people who have studied perception. They come up with factors that will influence perception, for example. And there are three big groups of factors. Okay. The first group is factors in the perceiver, who is looking at the object. That is factors on the receiver. And it depends on the person's attitude, it depends on the person's motive, it depends on the person's interest, it depends on the person's experience, on the expectation. So let me take a easy example, okay? I don't know how many of you are, I don't know how you are going to look at the Russian and Ukrainian war. Most people will look at it as a Russian invasion of Ukraine, right? That is your attitude. So from the French perspective, from the US perspective, they will look at this Russian invasion as an invasion, as a crime against humanity. And that is how they perceive it. And that is because they are French, they are US people, right? I'm pretty sure in Russia, inside Russia, there are people who are supportive of Putin. Or you can take Putin as an example. Putin, his attitude is that Ukraine is trying to join NATO, and if it joins NATO, that Russia is going to lose the last stronghold in its border with NATO countries, and Russia is no longer going to be able to defend itself. That is his reasoning. So that is Putin, the perceiver, looking at Ukraine and form his own perception. So there are factors in the perceiver, and then there are factors in the situation, context situation. It depends on the time, right? It depends on work settings. It depends on social settings there. Some of you may know that when you are watching a football game, soccer game, basketball game, if you are watching alone, the game is different than when you are watching with your friends, watching it with a group of people. Okay, that is what context means. It depends on how you are consuming this media. And so when you are thinking about new media, you can think about it too. In Facebook, when you are posting something, it's quite different when you are writing it on your notebook, on your personal diary. For example, you know that personal diary is only going to be read by yourself. But when you are writing a Facebook post, other people are going to react to it. That is the setting that sets you up to how you approach something. The same is true here. It affects our perception there. There is actually a very classic study on perception, in which the researcher shows to the participants a picture of a group of children playing in the swamp, playing in the mud. Okay. So one group of participants were made to be really happy. So they are really happy, and when they are really happy, they look at that picture and they say, "Oh my goodness, what fun! Children are having a lot of fun in the mud, in the muddy water." But another group of people, they are made really sad. Okay, so the setting is very different. And when they look at the picture, they will say, "Gee, what kind of parenting these people are doing?" Okay, parents are not doing their job. They are just letting children do whatever they do, and so on. That is how it's being perceived because of the settings there. And of course, how information is being presented, whether it's being presented in a smartphone, whether it's being presented on the internet, whether it's being presented in the newspaper, and whether there are novelties, whether there is motion, talking about television, right? When you make a TV news story and if you don't have a lot of motion or steady shots, for example, and you say, how do people look at that news and think about that news? That's motion and sound and size and background and proximity and so on. So these three groups of inferences on perception, it's just an example how we approach, something from different angles. So in one study, you can focus on, how people's motives, whether they come here to learn versus whether they come here to be entertained. How does that change their perception of the talk, for example? Uh, and so that is one area that you can focus on. The next time, you can focus on how information is being laid out, and there are a lot of such examples, right? If you present that information in a stunning PowerPoint, for example, versus a social PowerPoint, your perception may be very different. And that is factors in the target, and then factors in the environment. Talking about factors in the target, let me just give you some, ready examples. Like when we are perceiving things, there are some principles of perception, right? How we organize information. And these are called Gestalt principles. Some of you probably know. And you have figure and ground, principles of similarity, principles of proximity, continuity, closure, symmetry, and so on. So in terms of figure and ground, for example, it depends on how you look at this particular picture. If you look at it and say, hey, there are white horses and white warriors, then everything else is in the background. Versus when you look at them and you say, no, there are black horses and black warriors, and so the white warriors and the white horses becomes the background, and that is how we are being affected by perception. So the same is true here, right? Either you are looking at two profiles of faces, or you are looking at a vase and you say, oh, this is a vase for flowers. And so that's figure and foreground. That's how we change our perception. In terms of similarity, when information is being put in such a way, we have in our brain, we will try to organize it. And when we see similarities, we will put similarities together, right? So we see white dots and pink dogs. And so we see one road of white dogs, another road of pink dots and white dogs and pink dogs, and so on. However, if you put things close together, all these oval, we see four columns of oval because the ovals are close together. So we do that. Continuity is the same, right? So we see a horizontal line and a vertical line. We don't see horizontal then becomes vertical, vertical becomes horizontal. We don't see it that way. We see a line here, a line horizontally, and closure is the same. The triangle and the circles here, they are not circles. They are not it's not a triangle, but we fill in that information, right? We fill in that information and say that is a triangle, but it's not a triangle. If you look at it, it's being broken. The circle too is being broken there, but we fill in that information. That is how information itself, the factors in the target affect how we perceive things. The same is true of this symmetry. Two, two square here. They are because they are similar. We look at it as, two things there. And so we are being fooled a lot of the times. Oftentimes we say what we see is what we believe. Um, and just some of the fallacies here. For example, the line in between the arrows on the left and the line in between the closed arrows on the right, they are the same length, but we all perceive that to be different length there. And the dot in the middle down there, they are the same size, and so on. And so talking about perception, it depends on, how we look at things. This is a quite interesting picture that some of you may have seen. Some of you see a very pretty young lady, right? Some of you see a very evil old lady with a big nose and a big chain. And sometimes this picture is being labeled daughters and evil mother-in-law, right? And so it's so if you're looking at the picture as a beautiful young lady, you see the side of the lady. So this part, I don't know whether you can see. This part is the face of that young lady and her hair, right? And this is her neck, and this is part of her body. But if you see a evil old lady, this is the eye of the evil old lady. This is the eye. This is the big nose of that lady and the mouth of that lady, right?
Can I see the old lady?
You cannot see the old lady?
No. Where is it?
No, look at it here. Okay, so this is her hair for sure, and this is her scarf. The entire thing is her scarf, and this is her nose. The old young lady's face is her nose.
Nose. Okay, okay. Got it. So, 那个白色 the white one.
The big nose there.
So this is the face of the old lady, and the hair. So this is the nose.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh, yeah.
Right.
I mean,
So it's very interesting, right? This set is true too, So if you are looking, if you scan it from the left to the right, you see a face, and the face gradually change to a naked lady, right? If you look at it from the right, it's the naked lady and then becoming the face. So the question is, what does this look like? So if you look at it from the right, you will think this is a face. If you look at it from the left, you will think this is a lady, in the middle. And so that is how things, change our perception. And what I'm trying to say is, whenever you approach a particular area of research, you really have to think about, so in terms of perception, what are some of the things that can change? And then you can isolate each one of them and say, okay, let's look at factors in the target. Let's look at factors in the perceiver. Let's look at factors in the setting, for example. And you can design a series of study to look at a particular issue. Um, so that's what I typically do. So a little bit about myself and how I approach my area of research. I am interested in new media and convergence, but most of my research is related to television news and media, and in the two convergence there. And I try to do this because I want you to think about what are some of the topic area that I can explore based on the thinking that I have here. Okay, so one of my area of research is called news analysis. You look at the news and you say, what can we study? In terms of news, lots of people study news. What can we study? And news is a lot of things, right? Today we look at, Ukraine and Russia, and look at Vladimir Putin when he, meet with Macron. He uses a long table, for example, and when he meets his cabinet, even when he meets his cabinet, he uses a long table. What does that mean? That's news analysis. And when the Ukrainian war is raging on, when something break, what can we do? What kind of research can we do about news, for example? And I would say that there are a lot of opportunities when we look at news. We can use psychological perspective, just like what I talk about. You can study how people pay attention to news, whether their heart rate changes or not. You can use anthropological perspective and look at the place of news in human beings. Why do we need news? Oh, because we need to be aware of our environment, right? So that in ancient times, we have survival needs. And being aware of what is going on in our environment really has survival instinct to it, meaning that we have to monitor what is going on around us. And you can use economic perspective to say, how does the news department make money, and what are some of the models of making money? And you can use historical perspective to study news, sociological, or even in terms of First Amendment, what kind of news is allowed, and people use semiotics or whatever. So many perspectives can be applied to the study of news. But personally, I will look at news, for example, and divide them into several areas. And so the first area will be news gathering. We need to look at news gathering and say, how should we study news gathering? And we look at the functions of news. What kind of function does news serve to society, to humans, and study it? And we can look at effects of news, and we can look at factors that affect how news is being produced. So in terms of news gathering, first of all, if you really want, you can spend your lifetime just working on the definition of news. It may sound easy, but it's not, right? What is news? People say this is hard news, this is soft news, but what exactly is news? These days, anybody can, use a cell phone and upload something. Is that news? And if you say no, that is not news. Why is that not news? That definition is very interesting, right? And talking about the news medium, I mentioned that in television, it's very different from print, for example. And so you can look at print medium, you can look at internet news versus news in social media, for example, and how they may be different from traditional news. And you can look at, in terms of news gathering, you can look at news people. What are, who are the people in the news? And there are a lot of study like that, right? My professor at Indiana, Professor David Weaver, and Cliff Wilhoit, they study journalists, and they say what kind of people want to be journalists, for example. Typically, they are the people who care a lot about social justice. They want to right the wrongs of society, for example. They have a fair mind, most of them have a fair mind, meaning that, they want to make sure that, what they say is accurate, and what they say is objective. Of course, these days you can make an argument that there's no longer the case. You look at Fox News, you look at, some of the liberal news media, they have an agenda and they care more about money. And a lot of people also look at news people and then say, in the United States, for example, most of the news professionals tend to be more liberal than the general population, meaning that they typically are more educated, they typically are Caucasians, they typically are richer than most people, and so on. And so you can look at them and say, what is the ideology of these news people, and so on and so forth. And you can look at news gathering in terms of the values in the news. And you say, what do you mean by value in the news? I'll touch on that. So talking about definition, one of the I just mentioned news. How do you define what is news? And it seems very easy. And that actually defining a concept in research is the most important thing. So I want to translate it to something that you are studying, new media and convergence. One of the most often used concept in these kind of research is interactivity, right? How people interact. And so you don't want to approach your topic and say, I want to study interactivity without really defining what is interactivity. And so people who have explicated the concept, they say, oh, interactivity, it means a number of things, okay? First of all, somebody define it according to technology, whether the technology allows speed, what kind of range does it allow, and in terms of timing, and in terms of sensory data, for example. And somebody define interactivity as a context variable. So do you feel somebody is watching you? Social presence, right? When you are posting something on Facebook, do you feel other people are watching or are expecting, going to react to it? The other one is user perspective kind of definition, and meaning that, okay, do I feel the speed is fast enough that I can interact? Do I feel that somebody is close, in proximity, so I can talk to them, and so on. So, so definition is something we can spend a whole afternoon to just talk about, but it's the an important first step in doing any research. And the other one, we talk about values in the news in terms of gathering, right? So I say when we analyze the news, we can, of course, look at the topics of coverage, like Ukrainian war, COVID situation in Hong Kong, the NBA playoff or whatever. Uh, but the more interesting thing is, can we look beyond the news and identify what are some of the news values? What are some of the values, the kind of beliefs? By values, we mean, what are some of the beliefs behind these story that we cover? And so in terms of values, people find, for example, behind news, there is ethnocentrism, meaning that it doesn't matter what country you are looking at, whether you are looking at US news, whether you are looking at Chinese news, Singaporean news, Hong Kong news, these, whatever they are coming from, they all have ethnocentric, they all care about their culture more than other culture. So if you look at Taiwan news in Taiwan, for example, I'm pretty sure you can find a lot of ethnocentrism in that the news do care about. So even when you are comparing, let's say it's an Olympic coverage, right? You will see there are more coverage in Taiwan. There is more coverage of Taiwanese athletes than any other country, for example. And so that's what ethnocentrism means there. So in NBA coverage, we always talk about games are being won or whatever. In the United States, whenever NBA games are being covered, you can see that the coverage focuses a lot on the individual, whether LeBron James is doing his best, whether Russell Westbrook it's ruining the Lakers, for example, rather than focusing on the team. That is what U.S. news typically do. They focus on individualism rather than the collective being there. Okay. And in news, you'll find a lot of moderation, which is very easy to understand because news typically will cover the extreme. They will cover somebody who overcome a lot of difficulty to achieve something. For example, they don't cover the mundane, like we are in a classroom, and that is what mundane is, right? The usual, they don't cover. And so in that, you found a lot of moderatism and pastoralism and stuff like that. So I'm not going to go into that. And I also said, when we are looking at news, we can look at the functions of news. So news has a lot of functions. There is the surveillance function I just mentioned. You monitor what is going on, and there is the cognition. We watch news because we want to learn something. When we watch news about Africa, we learn something about Africa. But also in news, when we watch news, it's also a socialization process. It's also a social control process. You also see a lot of nationalism in the news, and you say, what do you mean? For example, socialization. When you see in the news, the news will cover something like a police car chase. Let's just say that, okay? So the police will catch up with the perpetrator, and what you see is the cop will check the ID of the perpetrator, will check the driver's license, car registration, and so on. And so people, most people don't have experience interacting with police, right? When they watch enough news, you actually learn how to behave when you are being caught by a cop. I hope you don't get caught by a cop, okay? But when you do, you know how to behave. You're going to put your hands on the wheel and you're not going to move out of the car. That is what we call socialization function. And social control is a very interesting concept in news, right? And you say, why does news have a social control function? Just think about it. In news, we cover criminals, we cover perpetrators, and oftentimes, people who are corrupt, officers who are corrupt, government officials who are corrupt are being caught. And in the old days, they are just being sent to prison. But these days, because of mass media, they are being paraded in the mass media so that we tell people, look, if you commit some kind of crime, you're going to get caught. And so it serves as a deterrent for the upright people, the people who are not doing any wrong, and they will assure the majority that, okay, if somebody breaks the rule, they are going to get caught. Just like the social control function, just like some of you may have read the novel The Scarlet Letter, in that picture, right? The scarlet letter A stands for adultery, and so in that novel, the woman herein, was being forced to wear the scarlet letter so that everybody know that she has committed adultery. And by doing that, in older societies, when before mass media, that is how people control society. That's what social control is like. You tell people what to do, you tell people not what to do. And news these days also serve that kind of function there, right? And talking about news effect, I mentioned that whenever you talk about effects, you can think about effects on the individual, effects on society, and so on. And there are some people who make arguments that news are kingmakers, right? Ever since Kennedy and Richard Nixon's television debate, people say it's the media that make kings. Because if you don't perform well in the media, you are not going to be able to be elected. At least that is the case in the U.S. Donald Trump is a good example, right? The guy just do whatever to get people's attention, and consequentially, he's more like a TV personality than anything else. And so when we study news, we can study cognitive effects. In fact, if I have time, I will talk just briefly about a study on the cognitive effects of news there. There is also attitudinal effect when we see so much COVID cases going on, like in Hong Kong these days, 30 to 50,000 cases daily. It affects our attitude. In fact, these days my efficiency is pretty low because all you see are bad news about COVID and COVID and COVID, and it affects your mindset there. And affects our emotion as well. That's what affective effect really means. So when the news covers a lot about GMOs, the kind of genetically modified food, right? And some people put in a lot of misinformation about, the artificiality of GMOs and not knowing that, in fact, that kind of food is being the good genes are being selected and so on. It affects people's perception of that. And so the fourth area that I often look at news is what are some of the things that influence the content of the news or the what is being presented, for example. The first thing we can look at is how news is operated. In television, you have a set time to to broadcast the news, for example. And so some clever politicians, knowing that you have a deadline, they will manipulate the deadline such that they will make some statements right before airtime. So you don't have time to really verify that information. That is how they influence or manipulate the news, right? And we know that in television there is time and space constraint. So each story is just about 1 hour. 1 minute, 45 seconds, 30 seconds, 45 seconds, at most 2 or 3 minutes, right? And so in 2 or 3 minutes, how can you make arguments? How can you present arguments? So politicians learn it very quickly, and people who study sound bites, the interviews being put in television news. Holland, for example, from University of San Diego, he studied the length of sound bites in the 50s. At that time, in the 50s, of course, it's early stage of television news. The average soundbite, guess what, is 59 seconds long. Whenever somebody is allowed to speak in a news story, it's 59 seconds long. But these days, what is the average soundbite length? 8.9 seconds. And that is why politicians learn to speak in soundbite language. Like Donald Trump says, make America better, right? That is a soundbite speech. George W. Bush says, if Al Gore invented the internet, how come it starts with www? And that is a soundbite kind of interview because his name starts with a W, George W. Bush, right? WWW. So news. I mean, because of time and space, people try to manipulate the news and so on. And technology, of course, have a lot of effects on how news is being presented. Um, like O.J. Simpson, can't believe it. And now that was, when he was being tried, those of you who you were probably born after O.J. was being tried. That was in 1995. The trial of the century, so-called. He's a football player. He was, and his wife was murdered along with a friend, right? And everybody knew that OJ was the killer, but there was no. He had a big team of attorneys, and Johnny Cochran, one of the attorney, famously put on a glove, that the glove supposed to be picked up from the crime scene, and asked O.J. Simpson to put on that glove, and O.J. put his fingers really, apart and show the jury that the glove does not fit. So Johnny Cochran famously said, "If it doesn't fit, you must acquit," and that is what the Time and Newsweek was being covered. I mean, cover the story there. But you may notice that I said new technology. These days, people can make pictures very different, and so Time very controversially darken OJ's face on his cover. See, when you look at it, Time versus Newsweek, his face is a lot more dark than the Newsweek face. And people argue that it make him look more sinister and so on and so forth. Okay. So let me not bore you with some of these studies. What I'm trying to demonstrate, what I'm trying to show really is you need to approach a particular area so that you have a number of studies coming out and you have a comprehensive understanding of that particular area. And so talking about individual effects, right? So media effect kind of research. One of the study, let me just briefly mention that I have. It's an edits and cuts study, and we try to measure, when you have a lot of cuts, when you have slow versus medium, when versus fast, very fast cuts. So slow cuts being in 1 minute, you have 7 cuts, for example. In medium kind of editing, you have 8 to 15 edits in 1 minute, and fast you have 16 to 23, really fast 24. It's very interesting concept. Those of you who watch television a lot know that in Eastern culture, the cutting rate is a lot slower than in Western countries. For example, a lot of people make an argument that because each cut introduce new information, and when people encounter new information, they will pay attention. Such a process is called orienting, right? You orient to something, just like in this classroom. If I suddenly call your name, you are going to look and say and pay attention. That is a natural instinct. And so we try to look at that and try to look at, when you have slow, medium, fast, and very fast cuts, how does that affect your attention? And we try to measure attention by measuring people's heart rate, how fast your heart beats. The theory is when you are paying attention, let's say that your average heartbeat is 65. If you're an athlete, that's about the average heartbeat, right? 65 beats per minute. But when you are looking at something and you are paying attention, your heart rate will slow down. So if your heart rate is 65, when you are really paying attention, your heart rate will become 64 or 64.5 or 63, something like that, depending on how that happens. And you can see very fast cuts, and fast cuts gets your attention. The heart rate drops a lot more than the other ones. Okay, and people's memory becomes different. These are memory terms, but it's related to signal detection, so I'm not going to go into it. Tricia mentioned that I did a sensationalism study, and I think I sent that paper to you.
Yes.
That paper is really about, how do we package a news story. So there is a big body of research on sensationalism, and we say, when we study sensationalism, we say sensationalism can come from content, can come from people's intention, can come with packaging. How do you package a story? And television news is a perfect medium for us to study it, because television news is about putting shots together, putting sound together, putting your narration together, putting your sound effect together to make a story. And how do you put it together? It depends on people, depends on the editor, depends on the reporter. And so we did a study on 60 minutes and hard copy, and then we identify several prominent sensational features in television news, meaning that sensational programs always use a lot of music, always use a lot of sound effect, always use slow motion, not always, use a lot of slow motion. They also use flashes. A flash is a frame of white inserted between edits there, okay? A frame, 1 to 3 frames, I would say. So when you look at it, you don't actually see it, but there is a flash there. And then the reporter's voice inflection, we call it obtrusiveness of voice. So there are sensational reporters who will try to emphasize words that should not be emphasized. For example, when we say a conservative try to prevent women from abortion, and a sensational reporter will probably say conservatives try to prevent women from abortion, as if you can prevent men from having abortion. So that's obtrusiveness of voice there. So in that particular study, what we do is we went to CBS local station and then get some raw tapes, the B-rolls, and then we completely rewrite the story. So we make two versions of each story. Everything is the same. The narration is the same. The text is the same. The shots are the same. And we just added the tabloid features in the sensational version versus the standard version. So let's say this is a fire story. The fires is the same, the location is the same, the reporter is the same, everything is the same, but in the sensational version, we added some music, anonymous music, we added some sound effects. So in the fire story, it's the fire truck siren, right? And then we slow mo some of the shots, two shots, and then we added some flashes, and the reporter used a more dramatic voice in the story. So the voice is the same, it's done by the same reporter, but just more dramatic. And so we control the verbal content and camera shots, and so here you can see that people are paying more attention to the tabloid version. This is the tabloid version. This is change in heart rate, beats per minute. So the people's heart rate drops when they, in the 5 seconds, 10 seconds, you can see they are paying more attention to the tabloid version. And they, in terms of skin conductance, that is how much sweat, they are more excited about the tabloid version of the story. However, people find the standard version to be more informative, to be more believable, to be more enjoyable, to the reporter being more fair, more detached, and there is no recognition differences and delay recalls and stuff like that. So I know that I want to leave some time for questions. I know that I probably bore you for a long talk like this. So let me just open up with some questions. How about that?
Okay. Thank you so much. Let's give it a